So welcome to NYX Notes. This is our fourth note. So it's Julie and Allison, and we're sharing themes from conversations with the triathletes that we coach. We're passionate about sharing our thoughts and insights so that you can become a better triathlete. And today's topic was actually served up by an athlete, and it was the topic of power on the bike. So, like, how would you describe or introduce power, like just generally?
Yeah. So the way I talk about power in cycling is that it's a pure and instantaneous measure of the force that you're putting in the pedals. So when you think about power relative to heart rate, how hard you're pushing on the pedals, and it's actually, if you want to get into the physics of it, it's a combination of how hard you're pushing and how fast your cadence is, if you want to go physicsy on it. But anyway, the point is that it's this pure and instantaneous measurement. And it doesn't care if there's wind. It doesn't care if you're tired or dehydrated. It doesn't care if you're going uphill or downhill. It's how hard you're pushing on the pedals. Versus heart rate's a lagging indicator. So if you start doing an interval, your heart rate doesn't catch up for a while. If you go into recovery, or similarly, like if you're going up a hill or down a hill, your heart rate's going to be affected by that. And it's also, heart rate is influenced by dehydration status and temperatures and all those things. And power just isn't.
Yeah. And that's one of the common things I hear from some people is, isn't power only for higher performing athletes, or I'm not at that level. And I think for me, it's the one way to truly understand where you are at the bike, how you're executing the workout, how you're performing. But most people now have a smart trainer. So you're riding with power. When you
Yes,
do those intervals and we look at them, we compare week after week and watch the progression. So then to go outside and go by perceived exertion and heart rate, we're taking away kind of like a fundamental piece of it.
yeah,
But I think so. The thing is, I think that the athlete has to be willing to really embrace and own it a little bit to understand, that you can't have power, have a power meter and just blindly ride.
totally. You
Or
do
you're not
have
going
to
to
be,
get
yeah.
the benefit from it.
Yeah, you have to be willing to look at your bike computer and pay attention to the numbers and know what your numbers are so that you know what you're trying to do. So you're right. If you're someone who likes to just go ride and not think about stuff, then power's not a great option. The other things I really like about power, I like that it gives you a way better understanding of how to lay out your effort level on race day. It's
Yeah,
You can be so much more precise with your bike effort level when you're going by power. Heart rate is really unreliable within a
right.
race on the bike, and so power just really lets you dial in that effort level better. And then also variability. I know you look at VI with your athletes a lot. So what do you like about power and VI when you're looking at an athlete's workout?
I think it's really, I mean, the variability is like how steady are you riding? And the way I explain VI to people is every power file has a percentage, and 70% is called Ironman effort, 80% is called half Ironman effort. The VI is this was someone explained to me one time. You want to have like a little steady heartbeat. It goes like this.
Yeah.
If you have a heart attack going on, then every time you're spiking that power, you're burning a match. And my athletes know I talk about starting a race with a book of matches. When you burn
Yes.
those matches on the bike, when you go for that match at mile, call it 10 or 20, whatever race you're doing, they're gone. So like someone can say, but I rode at 80%, but if your VI is 1.12, you rode like a heart attack and therefore you feel like that.
Totally.
And the thing about power too is that when you're doing a race and God, I felt great on the bike. And then, at mile 6 on the run, I just completely fell apart. And if there is no data, I don't know what happened. I don't know if you were riding at 90% for half of the ride and then
Right.
you just completely tapered off. So it allows us to learn from what you were doing. Or when people say, I think I can ride harder, then, it's like, great, let's go out and do this workout where you ride really hard and let's see how that run goes. So it just allows for race execution in a way that you truly know. It's not to say it's the answer to everything, but sometimes people say, well, I rode 70% for my Ironman. What happened? Well, you rode the first half at 80%, which is 10% too high. The second half at 60%, which means you tanked.
Yes.
So that again, it's not just that number. And that's where it takes a little bit of willingness and the athlete has to be willing to embrace that a little bit
Yeah.
in order to know how can I dial that in. I think it's Joe Friel who said racing with a power meter is almost like cheating.
Yeah.
But it is if you know your numbers, you know how to ride and you follow it, it there's no question. When someone goes by you,
Totally.
I don't care. It doesn't matter. You just like, I'm gonna ride my walk.
Yeah.
And my walk and follow it that way.
Totally. And it gives you information that you cannot get from heart rate or speed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Real time.
Yeah.
And then afterwards we can
Yes.
analyze
Totally.
how did everything go.
Totally.
So I think it's from a regardless of where you are, it's how to better execute, I think, your races and also your training.
In terms of how you get power on your bike, I know I often recommend pedal-based power because it's just so easy to go out and buy the pedals and throw them on your bike, and you don't need to get the bike shop involved. You don't need a mechanic to swap out kind of bigger parts on your bike. So I like the Garmin Rally pedals, and also they're not called Speed Play anymore, but the Wahoo, I guess they're the Power Link pedals. And I find those to be just really easy things. And then you also have the option of switching back and forth between bikes. If you want to be able to have power on your tri bike and your road bike, you can have one set of pedals and switch them back and forth. But you tend to like crank-based power.
Maybe that's what I think crank-based power, and maybe I think the power pedals, they've made huge advancements. Crankbase is always dual-sided, so you always are going to see the right to the left. So if you're buying a bike, and you want a power meter, you can just have them put it on there. But if you buy a crank-based power meter, unless you're going to have it swapped out by the bike shop. But yeah, for people that swap between bikes, I mean, I have on my gravel bike, I have the Garmin gravel, I guess, power pedals. And my road bike, I have the pedals on there because I put it on after. But my tri bike, I've always had the Garmin, the Quark.
Yeah.
But I think, Quark is no longer Quark. It's SRAM.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So SRAM and Garmin, those are the brands I'm most familiar with, most reliable. I know there's others out there. DC Rainmaker is always a really good resource.
Great resource.
He will like to, power meter next to power meter for accuracy. And the other thing to think about too is someone like me, like I have 3 different power sources.
Yes.
And so you've got to know all of those might read differently. So your numbers might be differently from one bike to another bike. So one could argue that having the same on each bike is really a good idea, but
yeah. Well, and the other thing along those lines is that your power meter on your bike, your pedals or your crank-based power is also potentially going to be different from your indoor power on your trainer. And so a lot of times I'll have athletes ride the trainer and then separately on their Garmin watch or bike computer capture their pedals or their crank-based power, so we can compare the 2 files and see, are they within 2 or 3 watts of each other? Is there a 5 or 10 or 15 watt difference? So yeah, it's not always comparing different power meters can be apples to oranges. If you have one power source, it doesn't actually matter if it's super accurate, as long as that's the one power source that you're consistently using, then you are doing an apples to apples comparison ride over ride.
Right, 100%. And the other piece on accuracy is calibration. And so most power meters, if you have a Garmin, I don't use Wahoo, I don't know, but it will prompt you.
And a lot of them will self-calibrate now.
That will just say, do you want to calibrate your pedals? And that is especially if you travel or if you change from bike to bike, or if you use a computer on different bikes. So I calibrate before every ride.
Yeah.
And it's just, that's the other thing. Your data is only as good as it can be.
Well, and then the other thing, while we're kind of diving into the weeds on that, when you calibrate and when you're connecting your bike computer to everything, I've run into issues where not issues, but you have to pay attention to the crank length on your bike, because if you have the pedals and you're switching, if the crank length's 165 on bike A and 170 on bike B, that crank length affects the calculation for your pedal-based power meters. And so you have to make sure that's accurate. And I've had issues where I'll like set it on my phone and then I attach my bike computer, connect my bike computer, and it changes the crank length. So yeah, a lot of details to dive into, but worth it if you get them all right.
Yeah, I think definitely worthy. And always, I mean, you can obviously ask either one of us or your own coach or DC Rainmaker.
Absolutely.
But yeah,
Yeah,
it's a long topic, but it's definitely worthwhile. I think we're both passionate about power.
very much. Yeah. Yeah. So there you have it. Those are our thoughts on power on the bike. If you have questions about the topic, you can reach out to either one of us or any coach that you work with. As always, if you have feedback, comments, or suggestions for future topics, we'd love to hear from you. And on that note, we'll see you next time.